Today, I will be sharing 5 things I did to self-heal my anxieties. So stay tuned for stories and 5 hot tips. These are not the only things I do to handle my anxiety, but they are probably the most effective things that I do to handle my anxiety. So if you have anxiety, I'm not a doctor, but I happen to heal my own. Welcome to Big Energy. I'm your host, Kassi Underwood, here to give you a dose of that good energy and talk with people who do it best. Each week, I bring you the knowledge we need to be the forces of nature we came here to be. There was a time in my life when I was in what felt like a constant state of low-grade fear interspersed with excitement. Constantly afraid of something happening, something not happening, what this person was saying, what another person was thinking, whether this would work out, whether this would fail. I was constantly just seeking some kind of external evidence that all would be well in the world. And when I couldn't find that evidence, I would literally work myself into a panic attack. Sometimes they would come on without my prompting them. My hands would start buzzing. I would start sweating. I couldn't breathe very well. I would start to feel like I was going to faint. And other times I would generate a panic attack. I would start compulsively thinking about every bad thing that could happen. I would look at my cell phone and just wait for a call with bad news and just work myself up into an actual tizzy until I was having a panic attack, almost as a superstitious way to prevent bad things from happening. It was a control mechanism. It was part of codependency. At one point, I was having a panic attack because my then boyfriend had a headache, and in my mind, he was having an aneurysm and he was about to die before me. This is all made up. I mean, what was actually happening was he just had a headache. But in my head always went to the worst case scenario. So I got up and I walked across the room while he was having his headache, and I started to black out and I fainted, hit my head on the dresser, cracked my head open, woke up from that, splayed out on the floor, fainted again when I tried to stand up. That was all just from thinking. The cause of that entire experience was from thinking. And the doctor prescribed me a bottle of Xanax. And I got home with this bottle of Xanax and I was like, okay, I could take the Xanax. I'd been sober for 2 years at that point from alcohol. I knew that Xanax was not a good idea for me, and I'm only speaking for myself, but I knew that for me, that was going to be like drinking again. And I also knew deep down that for me, anxiety could not be solved with a pill. That nothing I was going through mentally was going to be solved with a pill. So instead of taking that pill that day, I knelt down on the bathroom floor and I began to silently chant the word 0 for 1 minute, just to make my brain shut up, like 0 thoughts, 0 feelings. The next day, I did the same 1-minute practice, just saying 0, 0, 0. And the next day, and the next day, until finally, suddenly, I had a meditation practice, starting with just 1 minute a day. But meditation wasn't enough for me. Like, that definitely took the edge off, and I was less likely to work myself up into a tizzy. I had more awareness about the way that I was thinking, but meditation still wasn't enough. Gratitude lists weren't enough. I had to change everything to tackle my anxiety. What I ate, what messages I allowed inside my ears, what I said, the way I handled relationships. And people are like, oh, wasn't it overwhelming to make all those changes? And I'm like, no. What was overwhelming was suffering from panic attacks for years while hearing from the medical community that I should just take another pill, and from the spiritual community that I should just say another affirmation, and finding out again and again that neither one of those options was substantial enough to actually change my mind. That was overwhelming. Changing my entire life and having that actually resolve my anxiety, that was not overwhelming. The purpose of spirituality is to set your mind free. And that's all I needed. So I wanted to share with you the 5 changes I made to self-heal my anxiety. And these are, once again, the ones that made the biggest difference. I did other things too, and I continue to do other things too. But these are the 5 things that if I take them out of my routine, even to this day, and that story of fainting, that happened 14 years ago. I've had some minor returns to anxiety, but I can always find the problem or what's missing from my life is that I simply took one of these 5 things out of my routine. I stopped practicing them as rigorously, and the result was that I had the same kind of behaviors come up or the same sort of anxiety pop back in. None of this stuff I'm about to tell you is theoretical. These are real actions that I take in my life. These are not like, ideally, I'll do this once a week. It's not sporadic. It is consistent. So these are the things I consistently do on a daily basis that keeps my anxiety at bay. It has never returned at the level that it was at that point. So the number one thing I do, the first thing I do is I meditate every day before I check my cell phone. And it's really, really important that before I check my cell phone thing, literally my eyeballs will start hurting if I look at my phone or email before I meditate. I have to just sit there, even if it's only for 1 minute a day. And I'm not like perfectionist about it. I mean, I try to do 20 on like a regular day, 20 minutes, but I started at 1, I built up to 3, then 5, then 15, then went back down to 5, then 20. You know, like throughout the years, my meditation has not been consistent with its time, but it's been consistent in that I've done it almost every day since 2007. Just meditating before I check my cell phone, whether it gets to be like an amazing 1-hour meditation or like a shitty 1-hour meditation or an incredible 1-minute meditation, even if my child is sitting there slapping me in the face while I'm meditating, I get that 1 minute in before I check my cell phone. So that's number 1. Number 2 is I changed my diet. So I had to find out what my actual food allergies were because the gut and the brain are connected. I was eating gluten, which I have a mild intolerance for. Mild, but it impacts me, right? So I get brain fog and I feel like I'm depressed if I eat gluten. I will go into like a low state where it feels like I can't imagine anything making me happy ever again. Dairy causes anxiety. And I got to test this 4 years ago when I was pregnant with my son. I was put on bed rest and a 3,000 calorie a day diet, which sounds really fun, but was like terrible. I do not recommend it. So I'm sitting there on my 3,000 calorie a day diet, just pour calories into me. That was our whole goal. So it was just tons of lasagna with ricotta cheese and gluten, you know. So I was just sitting there pouring gluten and dairy into my system. And I started feeling like I was on an emotional roller coaster. I start getting shortness of breath. My palms start sweating again. I get all the symptoms of anxiety coming back. And it was really interesting because years ago in 2007, when I was having my rock bottom around anxiety, just intuitively, without knowing anything about the gut-brain connection, I just knew I had to take dairy out of my diet. So I randomly, without any information on it, I was like, I cannot eat dairy ever again. So for me, I know that if I decide to eat something with gluten and dairy in it, which sometimes I do, because sometimes that dessert looks really freaking good. And I'm like, I'm just going to take the consequences. Like I'm going to really enjoy this cake, but I also need to have a high level of awareness that tonight and tomorrow, if my brain starts feeling a little bit sticky, if somebody says something and I go into a spiral, I need to be aware, well, there's there's gluten and dairy on my brain right now, so I'm not thinking straight. So having that level of awareness, and most of the time it's usually not worth it, and I'd rather just feel peace of mind. The number 3 thing that I do is I seek my sense of security from within myself. What this means is that when I get afraid, and anxiety is just fear. I remember when I figured out anxiety is just a high level of fear that I'm refeeling and refeeling over and over and over again. When I get into that fear state, my tendency is to reach outside of myself, to check my email, to see if I got an answer, to try to collect evidence of whether everything's okay in this area or that area. Instead, what I need to do, because that never works, it never works. If we use the example of alcoholism, it's like the alcoholic takes a drink because they think they're going to feel better after that drink. But instead, if you take a drink, you just want more. And that's the same for when I'm trying to search outside myself for that validation. I just end up wanting more and more and more, and I can't ever get enough. So I seek my sense of security from within myself. And that means, in the simplest way, if I start to think that I need an answer, I need evidence, I need proof, I need validation in order to feel okay about something, if I need any third dimensional evidence for me to feel okay internally, I know that I need to have sobriety around that and not reach for it, not reach out for something else to feel okay. That instead I just need to sit there and try to get okay within myself without needing anybody to change, without needing an answer, without needing evidence. I need to just sit there and get connected to myself, to the universe, to God, to whatever name you want to call it. And when I do that without reaching out for anything else, then I can get to that peace. The peace isn't from the outside. So that's my number 3. Number 4 is that I had to learn a process to deal with fear. This is related to number 3. Number 3 is kind of have sobriety around reaching out for something else to make me feel not afraid. So just stop reaching out to other people, to the email, to Instagram, whatever it is. So where that's sobriety, not partaking. Number 4 is to stop resisting what I'm afraid of. Stop resisting it. So literally write down what I'm afraid is going to happen, and then write down what it would look like if I applied deeper truth to the situation, and what it would look like if what I feared happened and I behave as my most courageous self. So I'll give you an example of what resistance looks like. And you probably know for yourself what resistance looks like. But for me, here's an example. Airplanes. I used to be terrified of flying. I was a nightmare on a plane. The old lady sitting next to me would hold my hand to try to comfort me. Flight attendants, I once asked one to sit down next to me because I was so scared. It was literally I'm gripping the seat as if by holding onto the cushion, I'm going to steer the plane. Total control thing. I'm tightening my body as if to try to stop the plane from crashing. I'm looking around at everybody's facial expressions for affirmation that other people are either afraid or not afraid. So am I the only one who feels like the plane is doing something weird right now? That sort of thing. Practically generating a panic attack anytime I'm on a plane. What I had to do was I had to stop resisting the turbulence. Stop resisting any turn of the plane, any noise, anything about being on a plane that made me feel uncomfortable. I had to allow it. So when I'm in resistance, I am in fear. When I'm in allowing, I'm in a state of peace and surrender. So that looked like I had to relax and quote unquote allow the plane to crash. If I'm a woman of courage, rather than looking around to get confirmation from other people that they're either afraid or not afraid, thinking of how I would comfort others if the plane were crashing. So not trying to talk myself out of it. Statistically, this is very unlikely to happen. That doesn't work for somebody like me. I'm right. I'll be the one plane that it does happen to. My boyfriend and I were looking at watching Blood Red Sky the other day. And beforehand, I was you have to know that I don't fill my brain with this sort of information, or imagery of planes with problems on them, because the next time we're on a plane, I will be like really freaked out. I was like, I will watch this with you, but you have to know that next time we're on a plane, I will probably be freaking out. So you're going to have to agree to comfort me next time. Spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you something that happens in the movie. I won't tell you the end, but the movie is all about there being like vampires on the plane. And like my brain, as long as I don't eat dairy and gluten before I get on that plane, I'm probably going to be fine. But my brain would go there. It'd be like, are there vampires on the plane? Like completely insane levels of anxiety is what happens to me. So the work then is to allow vampires on the plane, like allow it to happen. And rather than thinking, oh my God, I'm so scared, we have to stop this from happening, thinking, how will I be of service if there are vampires on the plane, right? So never resisting what we're afraid of, always being prepared to be our most courageous self, always building the inner fortitude to handle vampires on a plane. Number 5, and this one's really for the win. This is the thing that I do that probably of everything I'm talking about, I mean, they're all really important, but this one is like super for the win, and that is building the muscle of truth. This was the hardest one for me because it required such a change in my life. So when I wasn't telling the truth, and it's not like I'm perfect at this now, it's that I'll go back and correct it, and I'm much better at it. It's much more natural for me just to be in truth now. And so here's what it looked like when I did not have a muscle of truth, when it was extremely atrophied, mainly from my codependent habits. Here's what it looked like. I would give up my truth to gain the approval for others. I would compromise my own truth and integrity to avoid rejection or to avoid making somebody angry. I'll give you examples at the end of this. I would pretend to agree with others or to be agreeable to get what I wanted or to keep the peace. Everything was so calculated. Like I couldn't just live my life. Everything was so calculated, right? I would use indirect or evasive communication to avoid conflict or confrontation. And here are some examples of like what this truth mission looked like. I had to go on a truth mission. It wasn't like I just like casually decided to start telling the truth. I went on a truth mission. This is what it looked like. It took 3 main forms. The first form that this truth mission looked like was that I decided to be honest, even if I was going to get in trouble, look bad, or face consequences. This meant that I had to stop hiding where I was being kind of a shithead and not doing what I'd say I'd do, and really had to just like face where I was being dishonest. All the little white lies that I was telling, all those white lies were hiding from me the truth about me. Like every time I lied, I wasn't just lying to the person, even if it was just a little white lie, or even if it was just withholding the truth by omission. It was hiding from me the truth about who I was. Because every time I lied, I got to not face the consequences of my bullshit. I got to keep this self-perception that if I were really honest with myself, I knew I hadn't earned. So I saw myself as like a really, really good person who was selfless and always thinking of others and really caring for others all the time and doing for others all the time. But the fact was that there were some like little secrets in there. I did not have a life of integrity, and that was causing me anxiety. So what happened was that when I started telling the truth, I got to change my behavior, and then I got to feel genuinely confident and genuinely peaceful. What allowed me the strength and the courage to do this, because it was not easy. You know, this is like what separates the men from the boys. And what allowed me the strength and courage to do this was that I made a decision, and I made a decision to just face the consequences. I felt like I was so out of integrity in my life, not even necessarily in big ways, but just in these like little tiny subtle, like withholding the truth, hiding, trying to stay out of trouble, trying to prevent somebody from being mad at me. The house built on little pebbles of lies. the foundation was not strong in my house, and that the only way that I could get back into integrity was to tell the truth, even if it meant I would suffer consequences. And I decided that those consequences would discipline me until I was an all-out truth teller. So, for example, I did things like tell the administration at Columbia, where I was an MFA student, that I had fabricated part of my nonfiction writing sample, and I risked getting kicked out of the program. In fact, when I went to tell them, I was like, there is like an 80% chance that they're like, that was wrong and you're going to have to leave now. But I took the risk. I was willing to get kicked out of the program in order to be in my truth. I did not want any part of my life to be built on bullshit anymore. It was not working for me. So I did that. I had to go back and tell a boyfriend's parents that I had lied to them in order to make myself look good. I had to tell my friends that there wasn't traffic, that I was really just running 20 minutes late because I had decided to not get ready early enough to be on time. Those were the levels of truths that I had to tell to discipline myself to change. Because if I just went through my Columbia program, having gotten in on a fabricated writing sample in a nonfiction program, how was I ever going to build the discipline to tell the truth in my writing if I was lying in the admission statement and then continued that lie throughout the program? How was I ever going to be on time if I was telling my friends and therefore convincing myself that I was just late because of traffic? I was never going to be able to change, and the anxiety was going to persist if I didn't do this. So I went on, it wasn't just a truth-telling mission, it was a consequence-seeking mission. And those consequences sharpened me as a human being. I had to feel the pain of not telling the truth. I had to feel the pain of telling the truth and what the truth actually was. That's what I had to feel the pain of, was actually telling the truth and being like, ugh, I'm not proud of what this truth is. And that's part of it. The other part was, of course, letting people be disappointed, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But that was the only way I could face myself. And when I faced myself, I could change. The second part of this truth-seeking mission was not doing things that had never felt right to me to begin with. So not doing things that never felt right to me to begin with. And that included stuff like gossiping behind people's backs, making fun of people, laughing at jokes that never felt right for me to humor. And this made me feel considerably less cool most of the time, because in some cases it seemed like I had a stick up my ass. But I could sleep at night, and that was a good thing. When I stopped gossiping, or even quote unquote venting under the guise of quote unquote processing my feelings or quote unquote concern for someone else, I felt way more confident in my relationships and way less paranoid that I was being gossiped about. So those little changes, like not doing things that never felt right to me to begin with, making those changes, even if I felt less cool, even if there were a lot of conversations that I couldn't participate in anymore, and there were a lot of things I couldn't laugh at anymore, I could sleep at night and I had fewer panic attacks and fewer levels of fear and anxiety in my life. The third truth-seeking mission that I had to go on was not people-pleasing. And like all this, everything I've just said takes time to put into action, especially if we've built a whole world around being codependent and essentially abandoning ourselves to avoid punishment, to avoid getting in trouble, to avoid conflict and people getting mad at me. But it's possible, like little by slowly, it's totally possible. So for me, not people pleasing. If I can't do something, I stop saying I could do it. Or if I had committed to something I shouldn't have, I would go back and tell the truth as soon as I figured it out. I'd be like, you know what? I actually can't do that thing. Like, I really want to be able to tell you I can, but I can't do that thing, even if it left somebody disappointed. And I got to figure out what I really thought and what I really believed about things, not based on hearsay or what someone else thought, but based on my own research. And that made me not a people pleaser. That made me able to stand by my truth, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. I don't try to convince other people to believe what I believe either, because I don't want to put somebody else in a position to people please me. I really enjoy hearing different perspectives. I love hearing them, and I love when people stand in their truth and are just who they are. So Those parts were really important. And I got to let myself be myself. I didn't, there's a fine line with all these things. There's a really, really fine line, right? There's subtleties to how these things look. We've all seen people on their like journey out of codependency, and suddenly they're just like a raging bitch and putting up boundaries that don't make any sense, and like, just doing things that are like kind of inappropriate and saying that it's just who they are. Like, we've all seen that. And that's just a stage that we go through. But at the end of the day, when we go on this truth-seeking journey that's really like freeing us from anxiety, we get to be ourselves in the most authentic way that is also honoring of other people around us. So the simplest assignment from all this, from the fifth thing that I do to stay free of anxiety, is to tell the truth in real time, to practice telling the truth in real time. Like, even if somebody's disappointed, even if somebody's mad, even if it makes you look bad, like just telling the truth in real time and experiencing that over and over and over again, it shapes you as a person. I don't think anything has changed my life more than those moments, or given me more funny stories, because let's face it, it's fucking awkward sometimes to go back and tell the truth when you've lied. So as you see, I take a very holistic approach to my anxiety healing. I put these in place one at a time. It's not that I'm perfect at them. I still make mistakes or eat the cake every now and then, but I try my best to do them. And I'm very aware of cause and effect. And for me, one of the most frustrating parts of anxiety was being completely unaware of cause and effect, not knowing what it was that was causing the anxiety, not knowing a way out. And now I know that if I gossip about somebody, I'm going to be paranoid the next time that I see them. I am going to feel weird if I stumble across their Instagram page. If I eat the cake, I might have a lot of sticky thoughts the next day. If I don't meditate, I'm going to have a low-grade anxiety and be less productive during the day. Like, that's just cause and effect. And I have a choice. I at least have a choice about what I'm going to do. And I have a choice to be free of anxiety. And that's just what works for me. I hope some of this helps you. For me, what true peace is, and what true confidence is, and most of all, what true happiness is not being like, yay, all the time. I mean, that's nice, but even that can come from a place of trying to prove ourselves. What's real happiness to me is always knowing my way back home. No matter what happens, even if I do have another panic attack or go off the rails at some point, even if I go astray, I always know my way back home these days. And my hope for you is not necessarily that you do all these things unless you think that those will be helpful to you, but that you find your way back home. I love you guys, and I'll see you next week. That was another episode of Big Energy with me, your host, Kassi Underwood. Were you into it? Go ahead and click the subscribe button and leave a review. You can also find me online at KassiUnderwood.com. See you next time. And remember, Money Metaphysics for Maverick Women, my 6-month program, is open for enrollment. Learn more and register at KassiUnderwood.com/MMMW.